Welcome to Interfaith Voices, the independent show exploring the spiritual and religious diversity of today's world. I'm Maureen Fiedler. Today we hear from non-believers, an atheist and a humanist, and how they view religion, belief, and non-belief in today's world. As most of you know, Interfaith Voices deals primarily with faith traditions and interfaith relations, but we occasionally cover those who profess no faith and those who critique religion from whatever perspective, including atheists. But just as people of faith differ in their approaches to God, so those who do not profess a religious faith differ in their approaches to atheism, or as some would put it, humanism. So today we offer something unique. Two guests who differ in their approaches to atheism in the modern world. Christopher Hitchens is the contributing editor to Vanity Fair, a visiting professor of liberal studies at the New School, and the author of a new book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. He joins us from the studios of Marketplace in Los Angeles. Welcome to Interfaith Voices, Christopher.
Nice of you to invite me.
And Edd Doerr is the past president of the American Humanist Association, the current president of Americans for Religious Liberty, and he is the author of Here I Stand, and he joins me in the studio today. Welcome to Interfaith Voices, Ed.
Thank you for having me here.
First, Christopher Hitchens. In your book, God is Not Great, you describe religion, all religion, it seems, as poison, as negative, indeed as evil. And I think almost anyone familiar with history would say certainly that religion can become an instrument of evil or violence, but is all religion evil or violent? Can religion or religious people ever do anything good?
Not because of their religion they can't, no. I mean, my challenge is this for any of your listeners, to find a moral statement made or a moral action performed by a believer that could not have been made or performed by an unbeliever. I think you'll find you can't identify or locate one. At least I have not so far found anyone who is able to do so. Religion is poison because in the first instance, it asks us to surrender our most precious faculty, which is that of reason, and to believe things without evidence. It then asks us to respect this idea, which it calls faith. Second, it makes our ordinary integrity questionable. In fact, it attacks the very root of it by saying that we only act rightly because of either the fear of punishment or the offer of a celestial reward. That seems to me to be immoral preachment at the very, very heart of the business. It sets out to give a false picture of the origins both of the universe and of our species, and has repeatedly blocked attempts to improve our knowledge of these things. It has a distraught and repressed and a gloating attitude towards the sexual act. It poisons the well at its source, attempts to shroud that in guilt and shame. And in every other way, obviously including the ones you mentioned, quarrelling over which God is the right one, for example, possibly the most stupid reason for raising a hand or unsheathing a sword that's ever been invented, and persisting in doing this to the point where we're now about to meet the moment when apocalyptic regimes acquire apocalyptic weaponry. It may only be a fairly short time before civilization itself is entirely destroyed by those who believe that God is on their side.
Now, we're going to come to many of those specific issues that you mentioned in the course of this interview. I just want to ask one follow-up to what you said, which is that people of faith, as far as you can tell, have never done anything that could not be done by somebody who was not a person of faith. But would you not recognize that people of faith have done good things from their perspective out of a religious reason?
Well, that's obviously not to be contested.
All right. And also you talked about surrendering reason. I'm sure you would recognize that there are people of faith who think that faith and reason can be compatible.
Well, I'd have to take that on faith. If they really do believe that or choose to say it, I suppose I have to credit them with being sincere. But there's a radical incompatibility between deciding that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence and saying that extraordinary claims can be justified just on faith. It's just not possible to make the two styles compatible.
Edd Doerr, now you don't see religion the same way. How would you describe your preferred approach?
Well, let me preface this by saying that I'm not crazy about the word non-believer or unbeliever, because every believer is a disbeliever in everything that is incompatible with one's belief, and every disbeliever is a believer in something. Christopher and I agree on a great many things. So we're both believers and non-believers, as everyone else is. And finally, we've used the words humanism and atheism. Atheism basically conveys a message of negativity, of a rejection of something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell you what anyone is for. Humanism has come in this century to refer to something positive, something that one is for.
And what is that?
Reason, science, or faith in science, if I can use the word faith, respect for all people as being equal, the ideals of the Humanist Manifesto of 1933 and the one of 1973, and I find that humanists have a lot of shared beliefs with many people of faith. Then I come to the point that I think Christopher overgeneralizes in lumping all religion in the same basket. You've got the Dobson, Falwell, Robertson kind of religion, the Muslim fundamentalist kind, the jihad suicide bomber kind, and then you've got the Quakers and Martin Luther King, and you've got the progressive stuff that you find in Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish traditions in the United States today, that religious progressives happy to work together in coalitions for women's rights, for civil liberties, for things of that sort. So I think we have to differentiate between those parts of the religious community that are very progressive, positive, and, for want of a better word, humanistic, and differentiate those from the repressive, male dominance sorts of people on the religious right.
And Christopher, do you believe, then, that it's possible or desirable for atheists to join in coalitions with people of faith around common issues, as Ed just described?
Well, yes, but I mean, that's purely optional. I mean, an atheist can be a fascist as well, or a sadist, or a nihilist. As Ed correctly says, being an atheist doesn't tell you anything about someone's opinions. Telling you that he's a humanist does suggest almost immediately that he's a liberal. Not necessarily, but I would say there's a 90% chance he's a political liberal. Well, atheism doesn't necessitate that at all, nor does Christianity, nor does Judaism, nor does Islam. These things are purely optional. Many religious people, or people who have religious jobs, shall I say, appear not to believe in God at all, and to merely regard their work as charitable or humanistic. Well, that's a point for me. If they find they can't actually affirm the truth of the holy texts, and they'd rather be doing something else, let them do it. It doesn't alter the fact that what the holy texts contain is not the warrant for civil rights or abolitionism, but the warrant for slavery and racism.
And how would you answer people who would, in fact, find warrants in there for equality?
It doesn't matter to me what those texts say. They don't have any authority with me. They certainly do not mandate the rights of women or the abolition of slavery. To the contrary, they absolutely mandate the contrary. That's one proof that they're man-made, and man-made in a very primitive period of our history. That's what my book is, among other things, designed to say. And in my view, religion has to be outgrown. Where religion ends, philosophy begins, just as where alchemy gave up, chemistry began, and where astrology was exploded, astronomy began. It tells you everything you need to know, not about what someone thinks, in other words, how they would vote, but about how they think. When they say, I believe, that's all they're going to say. They're not going to say why. They're not going to say, here's the evidence. They're not going to say any of this.
All right, let me give Ed a chance to come in here, because Christopher made the point that all these holy texts support slavery and the oppression of women and all of that, and that's what they're about. Have you met religious people in your day who would interpret their holy texts, whatever they are, differently?
Well, it can't be denied that, as Ayaan Hirsi Ali has shown from her own background in 6 countries with fundamentalist Islam, that male dominance is an absolute atrocity. And we find this carried over today in the battles over reproductive choice and women's rights, the fact that our Congress is only about 15% female.
But have you met religious people who read their texts differently than what Christopher is talking about?
Yes, like Episcopal Bishop Spong says, hey, this stuff was created by humans, and you take the good stuff and you reject the bad stuff. And I think most practical religious people today, at least the ones I've known, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, don't say, before I make a decision, I better go look in the scriptures and see what it says. They basically use their common sense and the experience that they have lived And if this is supported in some way by their religious background,